Today I'm going to be starting a project where I finish all of the books on my physical TBR. First of all, my voice is a little bit gone today, so bear with me on that. But if you've been following me for a while, you may remember seeing my entire physical TBR in several different shapes and forms over the years. I've done several different videos talking about my TBR. I've done videos of my entire TBR. I've done videos of my TBR by different genres. And my goal over the years has been to narrow it the heck down, because in 2020, I went on a book buying spree after the pandemic. At one point, I had like over 150 unread books in my physical TBR, which I know if you watch a lot of YouTube, that probably sounds about normal for a lot of booktubers, but that was absolutely wild for me. That was very uncharacteristic of me. It was very much a coping mechanism in the loneliness of quarantine and being influenced by consumerism. I don't want to live that way. I don't care if other people live that way. I personally do not want to live that way. And so I have been working since then to reduce my book buying habits and to read the books off of my physical TBR and to just be really frank about which books I was no longer interested in, to unhaul them, donate them, sell them, take them to little free libraries, just to get them out of my house and off my shelves if I was not ever going to actually read them, so that I could get to a more reasonable space. And I have finally reached that point. These are basically all of the books that remain on my physical TBR. There are 10 of them. And I am ready to figure out if I'm going to actually read these and admit which ones I am not. Some of these I look at and they still spark joy. Some of them I look at and I'm just not super interested in them anymore. But I figured since I have such a small stack, it would be a fun project to just talk about all of them and to go through that process together to kind of show you in a microcosmic situation how I got my TBR from 150 books down to like 10 books and how I plan to keep it that way. I'm still actively purchasing books. I have my book of the month box coming today that has 3 books in it. So like by the end of today, I'm gonna have 3 more books on my physical TBR, but we're just going to stick to focusing on these 10 that remain as of today. More will come in, but I'm reading them so much quicker now. As I've been able to whittle down my TBR, I actually read the books that I purchase very, very quickly. Books do not stay on my shelves for more than like 2 or 3 weeks now. I purchase 2 or 3 books and within 2 to 3 weeks, they are all read. And then I purchase more. And there's just like this revolving door of me actually getting to read books when I'm excited about them versus buying them, letting them sit on my shelves for literal years, and then I'm either no longer interested or I try to force myself to read it and then I don't have a good time, or you know, you just feel bad because you spent money on a book and then it just sat there. So anyways, this is me entering a new phase of life and I thought it would be fun to take you along with me and to just show you my general process for how I was able to whittle my TBR down. We are going to go through these 10 books just like I have done for the past 2 years into how I whittled my TBR down. And the first step of that is going to be a little bit different than the legit process because this is, you know, very project based. So what I'm going to do is just read the first chapter-ish of all of these books. I can tell really early on in a book now if I'm going to be interested in it or not. And I don't push myself through books that are not capturing my attention. If you don't have my attention in the first 30 pages, then I'm probably just not gonna like the book. And I don't really care to read it at that point. Even if it's popular, even if, you know, I don't know, literally anything. I'm just like, why would I read books that I'm just not that interested in? So step 1 is going to be trying out the beginning of these books and seeing which ones I actually care about. I'm going to go through that process and I'll tell you about each of the books that I'm reading as I'm going through that, and then we'll see how many I can whittle down just in that first step. So I got through all of the first chapter-ish of all of these books. Some I read a little more than 1 chapter, some I read a little less than 1 chapter, just kind of depending on when I was able to make a decision. And sorry if you can hear lambing mode out there, but I'm ready to talk about this now, so hopefully it's not too loud. I am going to tell you about all of the books in the order of the least interested to the most interested. I rated them all on a scale of 1 to 10 for intrigue, so we're gonna go in that order. Out of these 10 books, I only ended up with 3 that I know I want to continue reading, and I have 1 that I'm kind of toggling back and forth on that we're gonna have to come to a decision on. But that's honestly about what I expected, to have 3, 4, 5 max books out of this list that I was still interested in, because some of these books have been sitting here a long time, and so I knew they weren't all going to be a fit. Anyways, let's get started with the first book, the one I was most uninterested in. A little bit surprising to me. It It will be surprising to you as well. I've had people tell me I will love this book. I'm so sorry, I will not be reading it. And that is Slewfoot by Brom. I've had this book for somewhere between like 8 months to 2 years. I can't remember. It's been sitting here for a bit. Everyone says it's so good, so I've been just staring at it, waiting to read it, but I've also been nervous about it because I knew it was like folk horror, historical. I mean, just look at it. It looks kind of old. I just didn't know if that would be for me, and it was not. On a scale of 1 to 10, my intrigue level for this from reading the beginning of it is a 1. I am very uninterested. I am just not super into the style of writing. It felt so historical. This is a story about this girl in the 1600s. I think it was 1666. Her name is Abatha. She is a recently widowed outcast in a village, and she ends up encountering this demon-like creature, and it becomes this whole thing about pagans and Puritans and the village, and I don't know. I saw the word nay way too many times for my liking. It feels old. I was not intrigued at all, and I am surprised, but I am also not. I'm surprised because so many people love this, but I've always kind of known it might not be for me, and I should have just trusted my gut. I am a Virgo after all, and Virgos can always trust their gut. Speaking of that, the next book that I was least interested in is Babel by R.F. Kuang. This book I purchased sometime last year from Book of the Month, and I gave this a 2 out of 10 for intrigue. It's an epic fantasy novel that has something to do with language and translation, and I am interested in language, translation, linguistics, and those sorts of things, and I have now read from R.F. Kuang. I did read Yellowface recently, and I did really enjoy that, and so I thought, you know, maybe I will like Babel after all. I picked it up because I was getting FOMO, because everyone was loving it. I haven't actually picked it up off of my shelves to read it because I've been worried that I wouldn't like it, and look where we are. We're exactly where we knew we would be. Next up, another 2 out of 10 was They Drown Our Daughters by Katrina Monroe. I think this is a book I would have loved like 2 years ago. I just am not interested in this kind of story anymore. It's a story about mothers and daughters. It starts with a family tree with way too many characters on it. I just wasn't going to be interested in it. It seems very like witchy, feminist type of story, and something about witch stories just never really do it for me. The writing does seem beautiful, like gothic and haunting, but overall it just did not capture my attention. It also starts with this historical setting in the 1800s, and that just isn't for me. I just feel like I've read books like this before and I've given them a shot, and I know that I don't end up liking them, so I think it's time to let this one go. Next up is This Time Tomorrow by Emma Straub. This one I gave a 2.5 out of 10 for intrigue. I just had an idea of what the story was going to feel like, and it's not that at all. It's a story about this woman whose father is dying. She is nearing her 40th birthday, and he is gravely ill and nearing his death. And then one morning she wakes up and she is, I believe, like 16 again, and it just is all about, you know, the meaning of life and reconnecting with your parent and looking at them through a different lens and understanding them in a different way. And it just sounded like types of books I've loved before because it has this magical element where she's like time traveling, and I just love stories about life and appreciating what you have and parent-child relationships. Like, it has all the ingredients, but it just isn't the tone that I was expecting. It's really, really literary and really, really somber, and I was expecting something a little more charming, I guess, with this concept of it being something magical. It also seems like it's going to take a while to actually get to the point where she goes back in time, because I read the first chapter or two and then I kept skimming to see when is she going to wake up in time, and it was like chapters and chapters and chapters, and I still couldn't even see when she gets into that part, because I wanted to kind of read it to see like, okay, does the tone shift when she goes back in time, but I didn't even get that far. Next up is Secrets Never Die by Vincent Ralph. I give this one a 3 out of 10 for intrigue. I am just unfortunately not in a YA mystery thriller mood really for like the past year or so, I would say. I used to read quite a bit of YA mystery, YA thrillers, YA horror. Not like a ton, but I mean, I probably read somewhere between 10 to 15 in a year, and now I read about 1 or 2 in a year, and it just doesn't capture my attention anymore. I don't think that's a permanent thing. I feel like I may phase back into wanting to read more YA books in the future, but as of late, they just aren't capturing my attention. I'm just not interested in reading about young adult teenage characters. It just feels very youthful to me in a way that I'm not looking to read at this point. for some reason. The story follows a set of characters who are getting together on Halloween, and they have this ritual that they do where they go into this creepy building and they confess their secrets. And I believe it's going to take a paranormal turn where the secrets like come to life and are haunting them. I forgot to say, this is an ARC that I received from the publisher. I'm not sure exactly when it comes out. Oh, September. It's coming out in September. And so if I was going to read it, I would have to read it like this month in order to read it in time. And I'm just not going to be interested in a YA thriller in the next month. I am just so very sure of that. And next up, this is the last book that I was super uninterested in, and then the rest will be sort of interested. So this is John Dies at the End by David Wong, which I've had on my shelf for a while. I bought this last year. I thought it just sounded really quirky and fun and like something I could enjoy. And I feel like I could have if I would have just read it when I bought it, because I was in the mood for something like this when I purchased this last year, and now I'm just not in the mood for something like this. It is very, very, very comedic and extravagant and weird. The writing style is something I've only encountered one other time, and that was from reading Tales from the Gas Station, which I believe was written under a pen name. I think David Wong is a pen name, and I'm like, are you the same person? Because they read the exact same in the amount of weirdness. Like Tales from the Gas Station, I compared that to Rick and Morty, and this also feels like Rick and Morty. It's supposedly the story about these two small town dudes who end up encountering this drug that can destroy the fabric of reality, and then they're left to deal with the consequences. This is also a start of a series that has at least like 4 books in it. And if I couldn't get through the first couple of chapters, then I knew it wasn't going to be worth trying to, you know, read the whole book and then be stuck in a series. I give it a 3.5 out of 10. I think I would have liked it last year. I just don't really want to read it now. It really just kind of felt like something a 12-year-old boy would enjoy, and I think I would have enjoyed it too a year ago, but as of now, I'm just not super interested in this style of writing, especially for how long it is. This is a very long book. It is like 500 pages almost. I'm like, I can't do 500 pages of this. Okay, next is the book that I don't have a firm decision on. I'm going back and forth on it a little bit, and I've actually started it before. That is Plain Bad Heroines by Emily M. Danforth, and I have started the first couple of chapters of this in the past. It's also a big book. It's like 600 pages, and it just sounds perfect. It sounds like a book that I'll love. I ended up giving this one a 5.5 out of 10 for intrigue, so it's more intriguing than not. However, I just don't know if I have the attention span for this book because of the way that it's written. It just feels like a lot. I think maybe if I had an audiobook, it would help me get through it, but do I really want to be reading a book where I have to say that I need help getting through it? I don't know. But it sounds like all of these great ingredients. I love the concept of it. I just can't imagine sitting and actually reading it. And I think part of that might also be because it's summer. I'm like, I feel like I could read this in maybe November or December when life's moving a little slower and I want to soak into a book and sink into a book. And honestly, I don't have that much of a problem of leaving one book out of these 10 just on my shelves, unsure if I'm going to read it or not in a couple of months, but I feel like I want to let this book stick around on my shelves for, you know, let's get through the winter. Let's see if I read it over the winter. If I do, great. If I don't, then I'll unhaul it then. But I don't have interest in reading it right now. I just feel like I might in the future. The concept of it is kind of difficult to explain from what I've read so far because it just sounds so intricate in plot, but it's marketed as a horror comedy, which I also do like horror comedy. It's about sapphic love, the art of storytelling, the rebellious female spirit, and there's a lot of different layers to it. Like in 1902 at this boarding school, these two girls who obviously were secretly in love with each other died, and then other people died, and now it's a century later, and there was a book that came out celebrating the queer feminist history around the school, and now they're making a horror film adaptation of it, and then there's things happening with the women. Like, saying that, it sounds so good. I'm like, oh my gosh, I want to read that so bad. And it's just a cool composition, the way the book's put together. Like, there's little bees on the pages, and there's a map in the beginning, and there's footnotes throughout, and then there's illustrations. Like, it just seems like a work of art, and I feel like I could love it. So I just want to give it its best shot, and that's just not going to be right now for me, maybe in a couple months. So it's still going to sit on my shelves. I'm not going to consider it a part of my physical TBR. It's just going to be like hanging out, and it might make it back onto the TBR in a couple months, or it might make it unhauled, we shall see. This would be a good place to tell you about my process with that. I do keep books around that I'm not intending on reading right now, so I don't consider them part of my physical TBR, but I just haven't quite unhauled them yet. And then I have books that I know I'm unhauling, so if you see any book on like the bottom of my shelves, the very bottom row, all of those books I'm just like waiting to donate or sell, and it just rotates out as I take them to different places, you know, as time goes by. But if you see the second shelf from the top, this is where I usually keep my physical TBR. So there's absolutely nothing on it right now because we're reading all the books except for my bookmark little container. And then across my bookshelves, on the other top two shelves, those are books that I don't consider part of my physical TBR right now, but I haven't read any of them and I might in the future. These are like, I'm more interested in them. The middle is kind of like, I don't really see a chance that I'm ever going to read those books. I don't feel like getting into the specifics of what those books are. That is probably not worth anyone's time. But basically, that's a part of my process too. Like sometimes books are just hanging out and they're not on my immediate TBR. They're not quite unhauled. They're kind of living in a limbo space, which is where Plain About Heroines will be living for the next couple of months as I determine if the time comes around for it or if it doesn't, because I am a mood reader. That's just how I work. So these books just have to stick around in case my mood one day changes. Now that brings me to the 3 remaining books that I have that I am interested in that I do want to tell you about. The first one is Ring by Koji Suzuki. This one I ended up giving a 6.5 out of 10. This is the original source material for the movie adaptation. I have definitely seen the movie. It has scarred me for life since I was a child, but I don't remember the exact plot details of the movie. I just remember the general main things that happen. I don't remember the kicking off part, the characters, other than the main, you know, if you know, you know, kind of character. And so I can't remember if this is how the movie starts or how the movie is framed, which is probably beneficial because it made me more intrigued to see how the story is going to take shape. The premise of this is that there is this videotape that is going around, and if you see it, you're going to die in 7 days. Unless, as the synopsis says, you do an unspecified act. So I won't tell you what that is since the synopsis does not. And the book kicks off by watching 4 different teens all die because obviously they did not do the act and so they are now dying. And one of the people who dies, their uncle, is a journalist who starts to investigate the history of the tape and to understand what's going on. The only thing that lowers my intrigue is the writing style isn't my absolute favorite. It's like overly descriptive, which could just be part of it being a translated work. But I'm generally interested in the concept, especially because I have seen the movie, so I kind of know where it's going. And I don't know, I felt like it was just attention grabbing, and I like the idea that the uncle of one of them is going to be the one investigating it. I could see myself DNFing it if, you know, I get further in the book and I start to lose interest, but as of now, I definitely wanted to keep reading past the first chapter, so this one did make the cut. Next up is Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. A romance made it. I know, surprising. But I ended up buying this one last year because everyone was loving it, and I don't read many romances. I really only read Emily Henry's romance most of the time, but this one was getting such buzz, and it was being kind of compared to Emily Henry's style of romance, and so it did pique my interest, and now after reading the first couple of chapters, I am confirmed interested in it. I ended up giving this one a 7 out of 10 for intrigue, and I do want to keep reading and see where it goes. I really like the writing style of it. It also flips perspectives between the main female character and the main male character. It starts with the main female getting her car stuck in a ditch, and then he tows her out of it, and then they run into each other at a bar. And that's as far as I got, so I don't know exactly how it's going to take shape, but I did read the synopsis, and it says that he is 10 years younger than her, and she's on this like path to be the sophisticated city girl, surgeon, really just like knows what she wants in life, and he is very, very different from that, and they're gonna end up coming together and trying to become a part of each other's world. And I don't know, I just thought that sounded fun, and I really liked the writing style of it, and I've heard amazing things about it, and I'm realizing Emily Henry also blurbed it, so this one also made the cut. And then the one I was most intrigued with that I gave an 8 out of 10 for intrigue is A Touch of Jen by Beth Morgan, which has been sitting here forever. I have definitely read the first chapter before, but I just felt like the time was never right for it, and I feel like the time is right literally right now. I'm like, yes, I want to keep reading this book. I want to see where it goes. It's a story about this couple, this man and this woman, who are obsessed with this woman, Jen, who the guy used to work with. It infiltrates their lives in really weird ways. Like they make sex jokes about Jen and like printing out Jen's face and putting it on the woman as they're having sex, like really weird stuff. But it's just kind of like an inside joke in their relationship. But then something's going to happen, according to the synopsis, that puts them in the Hamptons with Jen, and then things are going to go crazy. And I've heard it's wild and weird, and I just feel like it's what I need. I'm intrigued. I definitely want to keep reading. So for our next steps, I'm going to keep reading all these books. I'm going to take you with me. We'll see how it goes. We'll see if they lived up to the initial intrigue, if I end up enjoying them, if I'm glad that I finally picked them up off of my shelves, or if I end up DNFing any of them and none of them make it through. That would be an interesting path as well. So I've started A Touch of Jen. I am 131 pages into it. I just got to part 3 and I don't know about this one. I really just do not know. Part of me can't stop reading because I'm like, where is this going? But another part of me just so deeply wants to stop reading because it feels like it's going absolutely nowhere. At this point, I am almost halfway through the book, and if part 3 doesn't start picking things up, I don't know about this one. I know everyone says it's weird, and I know it has a very horrible average rating on Goodreads. However, I have a tendency to sometimes love books that have a really low average rating on Goodreads because they're weird, they're bold, they're risky, and I like them. So far, I don't think I like this book, but I also don't know. With these weird books where you just don't know what's happening, you don't know where it's going, sometimes you don't even know how you feel about it. I kind of like it, but I also hate it, and that's a really weird place to be. What the story is about is this couple, Remy and Alicia, and they're just weird. They're weird people. Remy used to work with this woman, Jen, and now they talk about Jen all the time, and then they find themselves going on this vacation with Jen, and like nothing's happening, but everything feels really tense and uncomfortable and bizarre. And I started looking at the reviews on the back of the book, the blurbs, and it all mentions like monsters or creatures. Kristen Arnett said, Morgan has created a fabulous monster here, legitimately Frankensteined herself, a wicked, unflinching, dynamite novel, blah, 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 blah. Tom McCarthy calls it a slasher gore fest, and Jean Kwong Fraser says, I came for the bloodthirsty monsters. I left moved by Morgan's deep understanding of the day-to-day absurdity and pain of the 21st century experience. I don't know what's gonna happen, but something weird's about to happen, I hope. And I hope it happens soon and fast. But this is unfortunate because this is the one I was the most intrigued by with that first chapter, and I guess I'm still intrigued. If I'm rating intrigue alone, I'm wildly intrigued because I just need to know where it's going, but it's also exhausting because it's 131 pages in and I'm like, come on, I need something to happen. So I don't know. We'll see how that goes. Here's the thing. I really wanted to like this book. I wanted to be different. I wanted to see all these bad reviews of people being like, I don't know, it's weird, I don't get it. And I wanted to get it. I wanted to love it. I wanted to have fun. I wanted to enjoy this book. But the masses are correct. This book, yeah, I mean, it is. That's the full sentence. It is. It exists. This is a book that exists. Gosh, I don't know. It is unexplainable, really. It's not even that it's so weird. It's really not even as weird as I was expecting it to be. I thought it was going to go in some kind of crazy direction because everyone's like, oh my God, the twist. Like, couldn't have ever guessed where the story was going. It doesn't even really go in a place that's that bizarre. It really kind of just feels like it goes nowhere. It's like the book starts one way and you're thinking, okay, it's gonna be this like vacation story and the story about obsession and maybe parasocial relationships and the toxicities of social media and putting on fake personas and becoming obsessed with people. And then they come home from the trip and then the rest of things just play out. And again, you're like, okay, I kind of see maybe where this is going. But then the book kind of falls flat on its face and it feels like it loses what it's talking about. So it's either that this book is either too wildly clever for me to understand how we're connecting the thread here, or it just really feels very disconnected and doesn't pull together a strong narrative. I was reading the author blurb on the back of the book, and it says that this is this author's first novel and that she completed an MFA program, and so I assume this was probably written throughout her MFA program, and this feels like an MFA novel. This feels like someone who was in their MFA program and they had an idea and they ran with it in their critique circles, and I can only imagine what those conversations would have been like. I don't know, the book just like, it had potential, and then I just feel like it veered off track and it didn't end, like it didn't land the plane in a strong way. I kind of hated it, but also I was intrigued the whole time and I couldn't stop reading because I needed to know where it was going to go and what it was going to try to do. So I feel like this is going to be like a 2-star for me. Do I regret letting it sit on my shelf so long and not reading it? No, I probably should have just listened to everyone's reviews and unhauled it. But I was intrigued. It did capture my attention. And I thought if anything, this would be the one I loved the most because I was the most intrigued, but I wouldn't be surprised if it ends up being my least favorite out of these 3 books that I read. Time for a first update on Ring. I am currently 75 pages in, and there's about 270 pages, so you can do the math on that. But I am enjoying it so far, but it's been a little bit of a journey. It's one that I've had to be more patient with. This was the book that I was the least interested in out of the books I was interested in, I believe, because the first chapter, while intriguing, the writing style is what I was a little bit worried about, and as I continued past the first chapter, I was kind of struggling with the writing style a little bit, and I didn't feel myself wanting to pick the book back up, but I decided to give it a little bit longer because I was only like 20-ish pages in, and I still was interested in the story, but I just wasn't so sure I was interested in the writing style. So I pushed through a little bit, and now that I'm 75 pages in, I feel like I'm in a much better spot with it, and I'm glad that I kept giving it a go. As I mentioned before, you're following this guy, Asakawa, who is a journalist, and his niece is one of the people who has died recently, and he's trying to figure out how these 4 young adults all died mysteriously at the same time. Did they know each other? What did they have in common? And the synopsis does reveal the basic premise of Ring, which is that there's this videotape that warns that the viewer will die in 1 week unless a certain unspecified act is performed. I feel like if you were just reading this book and you didn't know what Ring was about, that seems like a weird thing to tell you in the synopsis because it takes so long to get there. I'm 75 pages in and he just found the videotape and he hasn't even watched it yet. He's getting ready to, I think, in the next chapter, but like it is a pretty slow build into just meeting Asakawa and him putting together the circumstances of these people's deaths and finding out the connection points between them, and then trying to trace through what they did in their final days to figure out what could have led to their seemingly random weird deaths that happened all at the same time. All of my opinions still hold true. I still don't love the writing style, but otherwise I'm getting intrigued by the story and I'm very interested to see how it plays out in the book form. I do think this is a pretty different setup than the movie, but I don't fully remember because it's been so long, but I was looking at some reviews and I saw other people say it was pretty different. So I think after I finish this, I do want to go back and rewatch the movie, and maybe I'll do that within the confines of this vlog so I can tell you about it too. But if not, I definitely will be watching it soon and just see what the differences are. But overall, just like evaluating this as a novel as it stands, I am interested in it. It is a very cool concept. Like if you knew nothing about Ring, this is creepy that there's this videotape and you watch it and then you're gonna die. Like that is a very interesting storyline. All of this to say, I am still enjoying this one so far. I'm glad I'm pushing through it. I'm going to keep reading it. I feel like it'll be rather quick because it is pretty short, and I'll let you know whether I'm still interested as I get further in the book, or I might just update you when I finish. So let's talk about what happened with Ring. I kind of DNF'd it, I guess. It's been a couple days now. I was finding it so hard to want to keep reading this book. It's definitely a book I could have finished if I took another week to read it. I just don't like stretching out books that long, and that's a pretty good indication that I'm not really enjoying it. And I think this would have ended up getting a 2-star for a final rating if I would have continued reading it. So I don't have any regrets about my experience, but essentially what happened, I got about halfway through the story and there were some weird things happening that I just wasn't sure where they were gonna go and like why it was in the story. Basically, the main character's friend in the story, who's like helping him try to understand this videotape, just like really blatantly talks about how he rapes women and has done that for a while. And it's just a really casual part of who he is as a person. It's literally as if your friend tells you like, oh yeah, I play soccer on the weekends. That's how casually it's accepted. That made me feel very strange. I was like, why? why is that just being brushed over? Like if my friend told me that, we'd have some issues, you know? So that immediately was like a red flag to me. And I remembered seeing some things about that in the reviews I was looking at. I was looking at Goodreads reviews and they were very split. It was people either ended up loving it or DNF'd, even all the way up to like the 75% part of the book. They just gave up on it or they gave it a really low rating. And so it seems like a pretty divisive book. And in a lot of the complaints, I saw these mentions about this guy character. I haven't gone back and read fully into that now that I know what was going on there, but it just like, it caught my attention. It made me feel strange. And also just the writing style was so bland to me. I was just having trouble getting really engaged in it. And I think it's also just the nature of the plot of this one. I'm typically reading faster paced thrillers or more, I don't know, like action-based mysteries. And this is a mystery is presented to this guy and he's just always trying to find like the next clue to get him along in the process. Like, okay, I found all these 4 teenagers died. Where did they intercept? Okay, they all went to this lodge together. Let me go to the lodge and see if I can find anything. Okay, I found a videotape. Let me see what the scenes on the videotape are and see if I can figure out where they came from. And it's just like very step by step in that way, which wasn't super exciting to me. All that to say, I wasn't feeling great about the book about halfway through. So I decided to just look up spoilers for what happened in the book. And I read the whole synopsis of everything that happens and all the spoilers. And I feel totally fine not having finished this. I think if I would have read it, I would have been disappointed by it. And I did read the end, like 20 pages or so. Like I caught up on everything that was gonna happen, heard what happened in the ending, then I read the final 20 pages to see how it all played out. I don't know, it's just not something that I enjoyed very much. So again, this is another circumstance where this book has been sitting here for a while and don't really have any regrets about letting it sit here for a while. I didn't end up really enjoying this one and I haven't really heard many people talk about this book. I have never really like sought out reviews for it. I don't really hear people talk about it a lot and I am curious now to go explore some of that more and hear what people love about it if they do love things about it and what they don't like about it if they don't like things about it. But it is quite different from the movie. Now that I've fully seen what happens in the book, I'm like, oh yeah, this is pretty different from what goes on in the movie, although similar sorts of themes and pieces of the story that go together. But in terms of how the story is being told, at least the American version of the movie, I know there was an original Japanese version and then there was an American version. I've only seen the American version. I should probably watch the Japanese version as well. Anyway, the other thing I forgot to say was when I read the spoilers for what happens in the book and the explanation behind the origin of the tape and like how it works and whatnot, also weird. So yeah, I don't know, just don't think this would have been for me. And this is turning out to be rather anticlimactic of a completing my TBR video. So next up, I'm going to be reading the last book, Part of Your World, and hopefully this one will end us on a high note since the previous 2 have been disappointing. I've heard great things about this one. I'm excited for it. And hopefully this will turn things around. I'll be glad that I kept this book around. I'll enjoy it. That is what I'm manifesting for the end of this video. I've started Part of Your World and I'm a bit over the halfway point. I've made it to page 208 and it's around 370-ish, 380-ish pages. I'm loving it. It's so good. It's amazing. It's wonderful. It's everything that everyone said it would be and I'm so happy. It appears this video will be ending on a good note after all because I can't see any way in which this book would take a bad turn at this point. I'm like, no, this is great. I love these characters. I love the story. It's emotional. It's wonderful. It's everything that I was hoping it would be and I'm just having such a good time. I feel like I really benefit from the fact that I don't read much romance. I only read a handful in a year. So the ones that I do cherry pick and read typically really hit. And it's probably because I have less comparison points for the genre in general. It's like every time I read a romance, I'm like, that made me feel something, 5-star. Loved it. It was wonderful. I don't know if I can confidently say at this point it's gonna be a 5-star, but like it'll definitely be a 4. It's really good. You're following these 2 characters, Alexis and Grant. And Alexis is in her late 30s and Grant is in his late 20s. So Alexis is like 10 years older than him and they both interestingly have really strong roots where they are. Alexis is very much a city girl. She comes from a very prestigious family who is all this line of doctors and they all work at the same hospital and there's always a person in her family who works at that hospital and she's kind of the only one left now who's carrying on that legacy. And then Daniel lives in this small town and he works at this B&B that has always been in his family and like his great grandfather was like born in this house and it's always handed down in their family and he's the last last one carrying on the legacy at the moment there as well. I think that was a really interesting way to position it because it creates a lot of tension and a lot of barriers for them to be together, both because of physical location, but also because of personal circumstances, ties to their own roots. And especially for Alexis, she has never been with a guy like Daniel, and so he's not someone that she feels like she can bring back to her family because she's always with like these prestigious surgeons, and even a lawyer once wasn't good enough for her family. And so this like country boy is certainly not someone who she feels like it's gonna make a good fit in her family. Anyway, I love them. I love their chemistry. I love their banter. They're kind of just in a situationship at the moment, feeling each other out, and it's just very realistic and funny. There are some things that are like a little bit extravagant, and there's a little bit of magic in this book, I feel like. I hope that really continues to play through because I do like that. But overall, I'm having an amazing time. I'm gonna finish this book and then I'll let you know my final thoughts. 5 stars. This book was offensively good. It was so good. I cried, I laughed, I connected with the characters, I connected with the story. It was so personal to me in so many ways. I loved it. It was amazing. And what a perfect book to finish my physical TBR with. This worked out amazingly. This was wonderful. It was perfection. I loved it. It's gonna be one of my favorite books of the year. It was amazing. I feel like this book was one of the most accurate portrayals of domestic abuse that I have ever read in terms of reading a fictional story about abuse. It just really captured it in a really nuanced way that I feel like a lot of other stories miss the mark on, and this just felt so authentically portrayed. I mean, it was amazing. It was just so good. Everything about it was good. The love story between the characters was amazing. This was also a perfect comparison to Emily Henry. Anyone who's ever compared this to Emily Henry's style of romances, spot on, definitely agree. God, it was just so good. It was so good. It was so good. I just really loved it. I mean, there are things like, is it the absolute perfect, most wonderful literary masterpiece ever? Like, no, there's certain things about it where I'm like, well, that was a really sped up relationship. But also the main character is like 37, 38. And like when you're 37, 38 and you want kids, yeah, you speed up in relationships. Oh, but everything's so good about it. It's so good. This is my favorite male character I've ever read in a romance, ever. The main female character, I was getting so annoyed with her, especially in like the second half of the book, because it's like, how can you not see what's right in front of you? But also, that's so real. Like, that's so real. Oh my God, it was so good. I just feel like all I'm saying is it's so good because it was. It was just so amazing, and I really loved it, and it really lived up to the hype, and I'm really glad that I kept it around and that I did decide to read it. And I will definitely be reading more from Abby Jimenez. I keep hearing people say good things about her latest book, Yours Truly. That will be on my radar. It was just, wow. It was so good. So that's it for this reading vlog. What a way to end my entire physical TBR, which actually has grown a little bit since the start of the video. I have 4 books up there now, but like I got through everything that had been historical existing TBR, and now I'm just moving forward. But I only have 4 books on my physical TBR right now. Isn't that crazy? And it is going to stay that way. I'm just so excited about that. I'm so glad I did this project and got through that last batch of some books that had really been staring at me for a while, and just decided that they were not going to be books that I was actually interested in reading. I guess we do still have the Limbo book that I kept around with Plain Bad Heroines, but we'll see if I read that this fall or not, to be determined. But yeah, I'd call this a super successful video. I had 2 duds and 1 best book of the year, and I will take that any day. I did just want to end the video just coming back to this concept of, I want it to be clear, I don't care what other people do in their lives. I don't care if other people have 100 books on their shelves that they haven't read. I don't care if they have 300. I don't care if they have 600. I literally don't care. That doesn't bother me at all in any way, shape, or form. People can live their lives however they want to. I don't like to live that way. I've lived that life. It's not for me. It was for like a minute, I guess, but yeah, I did not enjoy that. It just was not fun for me. It didn't feel like a good use of my money or my time or my energy. I just hated having that many books sitting there unread. And I feel so good now. I feel so energized. I feel like I've been in a little bit of a YouTube slump lately because I've just been trying so hard to get through the books I already had, and now I feel so rejuvenated. Like I've got these new ideas coming to me, and I'm like, oh, I could get these 2 books and do that in a vlog, and I know that I can actually do it because there's so few books on my TBR. Like I'm gonna need more books to read in like 2 weeks, you know? And so I have a lot more flexibility, which I think is gonna be really good for my creativity. I think it's gonna be really good for just my overall enjoyment of my reading again. I am just having a good time. I'm feeling really good. So whether you watch this video and it inspires you and you want to do something similar, that's great. Maybe you watch this video and you're like, I actually don't care. I love having hundreds of unread books on my TBR. That's great too. You can keep living however you want. It doesn't matter to me. I just want to do what feels good to me. And what feels good to me is to have very few books on my physical TBR. And I'm so glad I'm finally here. I feel like I'm going to be enjoying books more because I'm getting to read them when I'm excited about them. So I'm excited about that, and I hope you are too. But that is it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video. Bye.